It's strange how silence can feel heavier than words, the kind that fills a room after years of noise, after voices you thought you'd never forget fade into memory. That's what it was like standing in my father's study the night after his funeral. The room still smelled like his cologne, like cedar and tobacco, yet the man himself was gone. My name is Ethan Cole, and my father, Richard Cole, was one of the wealthiest men in the city. He built his empire from the ground up. Real estate, luxury hotels, tech investments, you name it. To the world, he was a genius businessman. To me, he was a stranger who wore expensive suits and called me boy instead of son. All my life, he made sure I knew I wasn't good enough. When I dropped out of business school to study architecture, he called it a rich man's hobby. When I started designing small eco-homes, he laughed and said, "No one gets rich saving the planet." Ethan, he was right about one thing. I didn't get rich. I got independence, and somehow that offended him more than failure. The will reading was scheduled a week after the funeral. The entire Cole family showed up. Cousins I hadn't seen in years, distant relatives who never called unless there was something to gain. My stepmother, Veronica, arrived in her usual cloud of perfume and diamonds, her expression a mix of boredom and anticipation. My half-brother Lucas walked in 10 minutes late, adjusting his tailored suit like he owned the place. Which, technically, he would soon. Everyone knew what was coming. Lucas was the golden child. Harvard graduate, CEO of one of Dad's subsidiaries, the heir apparent. And me? I was the disappointment, the artistic one, the one who never cared about profit margins or stock options. The lawyer, Mr. Dempsey, was an older man with kind eyes and a voice that carried authority. He stood behind the polished oak desk, opened a thick folder, and began to read the will. The room went quiet except for the crackle of the fireplace. To my beloved wife, Veronica, he read, I leave the penthouse on Fifth Avenue, as well as my remaining shares in Cole Industries. Veronica smiled faintly, already calculating the numbers. To my son, Lucas, Dempsey continued, I leave the family estate in Westbridge, the vacation villa in Capri, and full ownership of the Cole Foundation. Lucas leaned back in his chair, smirking in that way that always made me want to punch him. The others murmured congratulations. I sat there still, waiting for my name, though I already knew how this would go. And then Dempsey's tone shifted, softer, uncertain. To my other son, Ethan, a pause. Heads turned toward me, curiosity and pity mixing in their expressions. I leave a small envelope, to be delivered personally after this reading. Silence. An envelope. That was it? Lucas laughed, not loud but enough for everyone to hear. Guess Dad really did believe in symbolic gestures. Veronica's lips curled into a pitying smile. I'm sure it's sentimental, dear. Maybe a photograph. I didn't reply. I just stared at the flames in the fireplace, watching them lick the wood like they were trying to swallow something bigger than heat. After the meeting, people began to leave. Some gave awkward nods, others avoided eye contact altogether. Mr. Dempsey approached me quietly, holding a weathered brown envelope with my name written in my father's unmistakable handwriting. Neat, sharp, and cold. Mr. Cole wanted this delivered only to you, he said softly. He gave specific instructions that it not be opened here. I took it, my heart heavy, hands trembling slightly. The paper was old, the edges frayed. It felt like something that had been waiting a long time. That night, back in my small apartment overlooking the river, I placed the envelope on the table. I didn't open it right away. I poured myself a drink, sat on the couch, and just stared at it for a while. For all his power, my father had chosen to leave me this, a single envelope. When I finally tore it open, a faint scent of cedar escaped. His office smell. Inside was a single key. No letter, no instructions. Just a key. Brass, old-fashioned with a small engraving on the back. B-17. I frowned. B-17. It meant nothing to me. No storage locker, no safety deposit box, no property I could think of had that code. I called Dempsey the next morning. Do you know what B-17 means? There was a long pause on the other end. Mr. Cole instructed me not to discuss the contents of your envelope, Ethan. He said, "You would know when the time came." I would know. I snapped. He didn't speak to me for 2 years before he died. How could I possibly know? "I'm sorry," Dempsey said quietly. "That's all I can tell you." I hung up, frustrated. Typical Dad. Even in death, he found a way to manipulate me. I spent the next 2 days digging through old memories, old notebooks, anything that might connect to B-17. I even went through boxes of my childhood things in storage, trophies, drawings, old letters. Nothing. Then, on the 3rd night, I found it, buried in one of Dad's old ledgers that I'd kept, mostly for sentimental reasons, was a blueprint, an architectural draft of one of his early properties, a hotel called the Belmont, built in the late 80s before his fortune exploded. I flipped through the pages and there it was, sub-basement level. Unit B-17. My pulse quickened. The Belmont had been sold decades ago, converted into office spaces, but I knew where it was. Downtown, near the river. It wasn't far from where I lived. The next morning, I drove there. The building stood tall and aging, its marble facade faded but still elegant. The name Bell remained etched above the main doors, the rest worn away by time. Inside, the lobby had been renovated, but it still carried that old-world charm. Brass fixtures, tiled floors, faint scent of dust and polish. I approached the front desk, where a young receptionist looked up from her computer. "Can I help you, sir?" "Yes," I said carefully. "I'm looking for the old basement storage rooms, specifically Unit B-17, her brow furrowed. "We don't have any basement access for tenants anymore. Those areas were sealed years ago. Who owns them now?" She hesitated, typing something into her system. "It says here, restricted, owned privately by the Cole estate." My breath caught. "Would you mind if I just looked?" "I'm sorry, sir. I really can't allow—" But then she stopped mid-sentence, glancing past me. A man in a gray maintenance uniform was walking through the hall, keys jangling at his side. "Marcus!" she called. "Do you still have the old basement keys?" He looked surprised. "Yeah, some of them." "Why?" she pointed at me. "This gentleman needs access to B-17. Marcus studied me for a moment, then shrugged. "All right, follow me." We took the service elevator down. As the doors slid open, a rush of cold air met us. The basement smelled like dust and metal. Forgotten air. Rows of locked steel doors lined the dimly lit corridor, each with a faded brass tag. Marcus stopped at the far end and wiped the dust off one. B-17. "Hasn't been opened in years," he muttered. "You sure about this?" I held up my key. "I'm sure." He nodded, stepping aside. I inserted the key. It turned easily, almost too easily, as if it had been waiting. The lock clicked and the door creaked open. Inside was darkness. I flicked on my phone's flashlight, the beam cutting through the dust particles swirling in the air. It wasn't a storage unit. It was an office. A small one, maybe 10 by 12 feet, with an old desk, a chair, and a filing cabinet in the corner. On the wall hung a framed photograph of a much younger version of my father, standing beside a man I didn't recognize. I stepped closer. The man next to him looked familiar somehow. Same eyes, same jawline. But it wasn't Lucas. It wasn't me. On the desk sat a small black box with another brass key taped on top. A note beneath it read, "For the one who asks questions." My heart began to race. I peeled the key off, opened the box, and inside was a stack of old documents. Bank ledgers, birth records, contracts. I flipped through them one by one until I saw a name that froze me in place. Ethan Cole, adopted. The word hit like a punch to the chest. My hands trembled as I read it again. Adopted. My entire life, my father never mentioned anything like this. I scanned the rest of the papers. There were dates, signatures, and a name of someone else under biological parent. It was the man in the photograph. And at the bottom of the page, in my father's handwriting, were 5 words that changed everything. You were never supposed to know. My breath caught, and I stumbled back against the wall, the flashlight shaking in my grip. For the first time in my life, I realized my father hadn't just left me out of his will. He'd been hiding something far deeper, something that tied my entire existence to a secret he took to his grave. And whatever this was, it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I didn't sleep that night. The words on that paper burned in my mind, looping endlessly like a whisper that refused to fade. You were never supposed to know. The phrase felt like both a warning and a confession. I sat on my couch with the document spread out before me, the brass key still in my hand, cold against my skin. I read every page over and over again, hoping I had misread something. But there it was in black and white, my birth certificate, the adoption records, my father's signature, the name of another man listed as biological parent, Thomas Belmont, Belmont, the same name as the building I had just been in, the Belmont. My father hadn't just owned it. He had named it after someone, after the man who, according to those papers, had given me life. By morning, I felt hollow. The world outside my window looked unchanged. Cars still moved, the sun still rose. But I couldn't shake the feeling that my entire identity had been quietly rewritten overnight. I wasn't Richard Cole's son, not by blood. And that key, that letter, that hidden office, it was all designed for me to find, but only after he was gone. I needed answers. And there was only one person left who might know the truth. Mr. Dempsey, my father's lawyer. I arrived at his office unannounced. The receptionist tried to stop me, but I pushed through the frosted glass door. Dempsey looked up from his desk, startled. His expression softened when he saw me. "Ethan," he said carefully, "you look like you haven't slept." "Because I haven't," I replied. I dropped the papers on his desk. "You knew," he sighed heavily, adjusting his glasses. "I suspected. Your father left me very limited instructions. He said that if you ever came to me after opening that envelope, I was to tell you one thing." "What thing?" He hesitated. "That the truth was never about punishment. It was about protection." "Protection from what?" I demanded. "From who I am." He leaned back, folding his hands. "From who your father was. Or rather, who he became after the Belmont was built." I frowned. "What does that mean?" He reached into a drawer and pulled out a faded photograph. It showed my father and the same man from the framed picture, Thomas Belmont. They stood outside a construction site, smiling, their hands clasped in a firm handshake. "They built the Belmont Hotel together," Dempsey said, "back when your father was just starting out. They were business partners, close friends." "So what happened?" Dempsey's gaze darkened. "Thomas disappeared. Just months before the hotel opened. Your father told everyone he left for Europe, but I never believed that. There were rumors, money disputes, legal threats, maybe even something worse. After that, your father bought out the entire company, renamed the building under his own estate, and erased Thomas's name from everything." I stared at the photograph again. "And you're saying Thomas Belmont was my biological father?" He nodded slowly. "That's what the papers imply." I felt the floor tilt beneath me. My father had built his empire on the ashes of another man's life, the man who had given me mine. And for years, he had hidden that truth behind walls of wealth and silence. "Why tell me now?" I asked quietly. "Because," Dempsey said, choosing his words carefully, "you're not the only one who received something from Richard's estate. There's another letter. It was addressed to you both, you and your brother." "My brother?" I repeated. "You mean Lucas?" He shook his head. "No, not Lucas." He opened a file drawer and handed me another envelope, smaller than the first but sealed with the same red wax crest. "Your father instructed me to give this to you only if you came here with proof from the Belmont." My pulse quickened. I tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper with an address, 47 Oak Ridge Drive, New Haven, and below it, 2 words, "Find him." I looked up. "Who?" Dempsey met my eyes. "The one who still carries your real father's name." I left the office in a daze, the address burned into my thoughts. I didn't even realize I was driving until I saw the city fade behind me. The roads narrowed into countryside, trees rising on either side, the air crisp with autumn. Every mile felt like stepping closer to something inevitable. Oak Ridge Drive turned out to be a quiet lane, lined with old houses and maple trees shedding gold leaves onto the pavement. The address led me to a small brick home with blue shutters and a white fence. There was nothing extraordinary about it, except for the silver plaque beside the mailbox that read, T. Belmont. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. Thomas Belmont was supposed to be dead, or missing, but someone still lived here. I approached the door slowly, my heartbeat loud in my ears. I hesitated, then knocked. A moment later, the door opened. Standing there was a man in his late 40s, tall, with tired eyes and streaks of gray in his hair. He froze when he saw me. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then he said quietly, "You look just like him." "Like who?" I asked, my voice barely steady. "Thomas," he said. "My father," I blinked. "You're his son?" He nodded. "Daniel Belmont. And judging by your face, you're his other one." My chest tightened. "He's dead, isn't he?" Daniel's expression shifted. A flicker of pain, then resignation. "Yeah, died over 20 years ago. Heart attack, they said. But I've never believed that." He stepped aside. "You better come in." The house was modest, filled with the kind of warmth money couldn't buy. Photographs lined the walls. Family gatherings, holidays, laughter frozen in time. One of them caught my eye, a young Thomas Belmont holding a baby. My stomach twisted. The baby's eyes were the same shade of hazel as mine. Daniel poured coffee and sat across from me. "Dad and Richard started as partners," he said. They were building something great. Hotels that were more than just buildings, places that felt alive. But when the money started coming in, your father wanted more control. He accused Dad of stealing. They fought. Then one night, Dad vanished. I leaned forward. "You think Richard had something to do with it?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "I think he buried him in more ways than one." He pushed a worn folder toward me. Inside were clippings, letters, old newspaper articles about the Belmont's construction. At the bottom was a missing persons report. Thomas Belmont, 1991. The date matched exactly when my father's company skyrocketed in value. "After Dad disappeared," Daniel continued, "Mom left. I was 17. I tried to find answers, but Richard had power, lawyers, connections. Everything got buried. Then one day, a man in a suit showed up at my door. He gave me a sealed envelope and said it was from my father, postmarked the night before he vanished. Inside was a photograph of him holding a baby. On the back it said, 'Take care of him. His name is Ethan.' I felt like the air had been sucked from the room. He sent that before he died?" Daniel nodded. "I spent years trying to find you. But your father changed your name, sealed your records, and moved you out of state. I thought you were gone." The weight of it all pressed down on me. I wasn't just adopted, I was stolen. My father hadn't saved me. He had taken me from the man he destroyed. Daniel studied me quietly. "He left you something else, didn't he?" "Richard. Something that brought you here." I nodded and showed him the second brass key. "I found this in the Belmont," he frowned. "That looks familiar. Dad used to carry one just like it, for the vault." "Vault?" I repeated. "There's an old maintenance vault under the Belmont. It wasn't on the official blueprints. Dad said it was for safekeeping, but I never knew what he kept there." I stared at the key. My pulse quickened. "Then that's where I'm going next." Daniel hesitated. "If you go back there, be careful. Richard Cole built an empire by making people disappear. If there's something down there, he didn't want anyone to find it." I met his gaze. "Then it's exactly what I need to see." The next morning I returned to the Belmont before sunrise. The city was quiet, the sky tinted gray with dawn. I parked in the alley and slipped in through the service entrance, retracing my steps to the basement. The air was colder this time, heavier. My footsteps echoed against the concrete. I reached the end of the corridor where the walls curved into a dead end. But now that I knew what I was looking for, I saw it. Faint scratches on the floor like something had been moved there once. I pressed my hand against the wall. It shifted slightly under pressure, a hidden panel. Behind it was a metal door, smaller than the rest with a keyhole that matched the brass key in my pocket. I slid it in and turned. The lock clicked and the door opened with a hiss. Inside was a narrow staircase descending into darkness. I took a deep breath and started down. Each step creaked, the air growing colder with every breath. The space opened into a small underground chamber lined with safety boxes, old furniture, and dust-covered crates. In the center stood a wooden chest. On its lid, carved faintly into the wood, was a name: Thomas Belmont. My hands trembled as I knelt and opened it. Inside were ledgers, photographs, and stacks of old legal documents. The top page caught my eye. A signed partnership agreement dated 2 days before Thomas disappeared. It named both men as equal owners of the Belmont Hotel and several undeveloped properties. The final clause was underlined in red ink. Upon one partner's death, full ownership transfers to the surviving partner's heir. The realization hit me like lightning. My father hadn't just taken my life, he had stolen my birthright. But now, with this document, that empire could legally be mine. And in that cold, silent vault, I finally understood what my father had been protecting me from. The truth wasn't meant to destroy me, it was meant to rewrite everything. I stood there for what felt like hours, the sound of my own heartbeat echoing off the stone walls. The papers in the chest trembled in my hands as I flipped through them. Deeds, transfer forms, contracts, everything pointed to one undeniable truth. My real father had been erased, and the man who raised me had built his fortune on that erasure. Every hotel, every skyscraper with the Cole name on it stood on the stolen legacy of Thomas Belmont. I took photos of every document, every signature, every seal. My father's handwriting appeared again and again, neat, precise, deliberate, proof of his control. There was no question that these were authentic. He had kept this vault hidden, not to preserve the memory of his partner, but to bury him forever. As I packed the documents into my bag, my flashlight caught something glinting in the corner. A small metal box half buried under dust and debris. It looked newer than the rest, as if someone had placed it there recently. When I opened it, I found a USB drive inside, taped to a folded note. The handwriting was unmistakable. My father's. If you're reading this, Ethan, then I failed to stop what was coming. You were never meant to carry this burden, but I know now it's yours by right. Don't trust anyone who carries the Cole name. The truth has a price. One I've already paid. My throat tightened. The note ended there. No signature, no explanation. Just those words. When I climbed out of the vault, the world above felt different. Brighter, yet heavier. The air carried the weight of history, betrayal, and something else I couldn't quite name. Maybe it was purpose. Maybe it was vengeance. I spent the next few days piecing everything together. The USB contained scanned letters and video recordings, most time-stamped from over 20 years ago. In one clip, my father sat at his old desk speaking directly into the camera. His hair was darker, his face harder, but his voice was the same controlled tone I remembered. Thomas was more than a partner, he said. He was my brother in all but blood. But he made a mistake. He trusted me. When the Belmont project went wrong, the banks turned on us and I did what I had to do to save everything. I told myself it was business, that taking his assets was a necessity, not a betrayal. But when I found out about the boy, about you, I couldn't erase that too. He leaned closer to the camera. I took you because I thought I could give you a better life. But every time I looked at you, I saw him. His eyes, his face. I saw the man I destroyed. He paused, his jaw tightening. If you're watching this, then you found the vault. And maybe that means it's time you knew the truth. Everything I built belongs to you now. Not as my son, but as Thomas's. The video ended there, leaving me staring at my reflection on the dark screen. My entire life had been one long illusion. I wasn't the heir to the Cole Empire. I was the rightful heir to the one it replaced. I didn't know what to do with that knowledge. Every option felt like a betrayal of someone. If I stayed silent, I'd be complicit in my father's theft. If I went public, I'd destroy everything the world believed about him. Then I remembered Daniel's words. Richard Cole built an empire by making people disappear. Maybe it was time his name disappeared, too. That evening I drove back to Daniel's house. He met me at the door, the same cautious look in his eyes. I placed the documents and the USB on his table. "You were right," I said quietly. "Everything you thought about Richard. It's worse than you knew." Daniel sifted through the papers slowly. His hands shook when he reached the partnership contract. "I knew he stole from Dad," he whispered. "But this proves it." "There's more," I said, pulling out the USB. "Recordings, letters, everything." He confessed in his own voice. He stared at me, disbelief flickering into something else. Grief, maybe, or relief. "What are you going to do with it?" I hesitated. "That's the problem. If I release it, it'll destroy the company, the foundation, maybe even innocent people who work there. But if I don't, his name goes on living as something it's not." Daniel leaned back, his expression heavy. "What do you want, Ethan? Forget the company, forget the legacy. What do you want for yourself?" No one had ever asked me that before. For most of my life, my choices had been made for me. By my father, by circumstance, by expectation. But now, with everything exposed, I realized what I wanted wasn't revenge. It was redemption. "I want people to know who Thomas Belmont was," I said. "Not as a victim, as the man who started it all." Daniel nodded slowly. "Then let's give him that." Over the next week, we worked quietly. Daniel reached out to a journalist he trusted, an investigative reporter who had once covered corruption in corporate estates. We met her in a cafe under the hum of soft jazz music. Her name was Claire, mid-30s, sharp-eyed with a voice that carried calm authority. She listened to our story without interrupting, occasionally jotting notes in her small leather notebook. When I handed her the USB and documents, she studied them with a kind of reverence. "This isn't just a scandal," she said finally. "It's history rewriting itself." "I don't want it to look like revenge," I said. "I just want the truth out there." Claire nodded. "Then that's how we'll tell it." She promised to verify everything before publishing, to protect us legally and ensure the evidence was airtight. Still, the waiting was agony. Every day I wondered if I'd made a mistake, if bringing this to light would cause more harm than good. Then, 3 weeks later, and it happened. The headline spread like wildfire. "The Hidden Legacy: How Thomas Belmont's Fortune Built the Cole Empire." It was everywhere. News channels, social media, magazines. The article contained everything: scanned documents, excerpts from the video confession, even side-by-side photographs of my father and Thomas. It painted a picture that was impossible to ignore. By the end of the day, Cole Industries' stock had plummeted. Reporters swarmed the headquarters demanding answers. My stepmother went into hiding, her lawyer releasing a cold statement denying all involvement. Lucas, on the other hand, went on television, furious. "He's lying," he shouted in the interview, his voice trembling with anger. "Ethan's just trying to destroy our family name. My father built everything himself. There was no theft, no adoption, no." The reporter cut him off mid-sentence with the playback of Richard Cole's recorded confession. Lucas froze on camera, his face draining of color. It was over. That night, I sat alone on my apartment balcony, the city lights shimmering below like fragments of something broken yet beautiful. My phone buzzed endlessly. Messages, calls, requests for comment. But I ignored them all. The world finally knew the truth. But instead of triumph, I felt an ache in my chest that words couldn't touch. Daniel called around midnight. "You did it," he said quietly. "Dad's name is everywhere again. For the right reasons this time," I smiled faintly. "It's not about me anymore." He was silent for a moment. "Still, you should know something. The Belmont Trust. It's real. Dad set it up years ago, hidden under a different name. With the documents you found, it's legally yours now. Everything he owned, what's left of it, belongs to you." I froze. I don't want the money." "I figured you'd say that," Daniel said, his voice warm with quiet pride. "Then use it for something good. Something he'd be proud of." I looked out at the skyline, the reflection of the city flickering across the river. "Yeah," I murmured. "Maybe I will." The next morning, I visited the Belmont one last time. The lobby was quiet, the marble floors polished to a mirror sheen. I walked to the old brass plaque by the entrance, the one that once read Richard Cole, Founder. The building management had already replaced it. It now read Thomas Belmont, Visionary and Co-Founder. My fingers brushed the engraved letters. For the first time, the weight on my chest began to lift. The truth had finally found its place. As I turned to leave, something caught my eye. A small envelope sitting on the reception desk with my name written in elegant handwriting. No one was there, but the handwriting was unmistakable. My father's. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single line written in black ink. "Now you know what legacy really means." I stood there, the note trembling in my hands, unsure whether to feel forgiveness or sorrow. Maybe both. Outside, the morning sun broke through the clouds, casting a warm glow over the building's facade. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a shadow of someone else's story. I felt like my own person, born from loss, built from truth, and finally free from the silence that had haunted me all these years. And as I walked away from the Belmont, the words of my real father echoed in my mind, not as a warning this time, but as a promise, one that would shape everything I did from that moment on. Take care of him. His name is Ethan. 3 weeks passed since the truth went public, and the world had already begun rewriting the story of Richard Cole. The newspapers called him a visionary tainted by deceit, while the business channels debated whether his empire would survive the scandal. For the first time in decades, the Cole name wasn't a symbol of wealth and power. It was a reminder of how ambition can rot even the strongest foundations. I should have felt peace, but I didn't. Each night I'd wake to the same thought. What if there was more? What if the story I had uncovered wasn't the whole truth? My father's letter still haunted me. Don't trust anyone who carries the Cole name. That warning wasn't about the past. It was about something still ahead. One evening, as I sat in my small apartment sorting through the remaining files from the vault, a knock echoed through the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, a woman stood there, dressed in a sleek black coat holding a folder pressed tightly against her chest. She looked to be in her early 50s, her expression calm but wary. "Mr. Cole?" she asked. I nodded cautiously. "Who's asking?" "My name's Margaret. I used to work for your father, in accounting." Back in the early days, the name rang a faint bell. I stepped aside. "Come in." She entered quietly, glancing around like she was making sure we were alone. "I read the articles," she said finally. "You did something brave, but you also opened doors your father kept locked for a reason." "What do you mean?" She placed the folder on my table and slid it toward me. "These were supposed to be destroyed after Thomas disappeared. But your father couldn't bring himself to burn them. I kept copies, just in case." Inside were documents stamped with red seals, transaction records, offshore accounts, handwritten notes. At first, they looked like normal business papers, but one file stood out, a series of large wire transfers to a private account labeled B Trust. "What's this?" I asked. Margaret's eyes met mine. "It's where your father hid the rest of the money that was meant for Thomas's family." The realization hit like a cold blade. "How much are we talking about?" She hesitated. "Around 80 million. I leaned back, my mind spinning. "You're telling me my father siphoned off $80 million meant for the Belmonts?" "Yes," she said quietly. "And if what I've heard is true, that money's still there." "Where?" She took a deep breath. "In Switzerland. Under an alias your father used, Project Orion." "But you need to understand, Ethan. People are still guarding that account. Your father wasn't the only one who benefited from what happened. Some of his partners, they'd rather this story die again. My pulse quickened. "Why tell me all this now?" "Because," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I think they know you've started looking." Before I could ask what she meant, she stood. "Be careful. They watched him for years, and they'll watch you now." After she left, I stared at the folder for a long time. The logical part of me said to leave it alone, to walk away now that the truth was out, but something deeper refused. $80 million stolen from the man whose name had been erased wasn't just money. It was justice waiting to be reclaimed. I called Daniel the next morning and told him everything. "We can't just ignore this," I said. "If the Belmont Trust exists, it belongs to your family." He was silent for a moment. "You mean our family? We arranged to meet at his place." When I arrived, he was already sitting at his dining table with a laptop open, maps and documents spread out like a crime scene. "I did some digging," he said. "The B Trust account matches a holding company in Geneva. It's under the name Orion Investments." I frowned. "Can we access it?" "Not directly," he said. "But with the original partnership documents, we can prove ownership. If we can get those notarized and tied to the Belmont estate, the Swiss authorities will have to release the funds." I stared at him. "You're serious about this?" "Dead serious. This isn't just about the money, Ethan. It's about finishing what Dad started." So that's how it began. The trip that would change everything again. We flew out 3 days later. The flight to Switzerland felt endless. I watched the clouds outside my window, wondering what my father would think if he could see me now. For the first time, I wasn't running from his legacy. I was confronting it. Geneva was as beautiful as it was cold, the city glowing under a silver-gray sky. We checked into a modest hotel near the lake. From the window, I could see the snow-capped mountains in the distance, their stillness both haunting and peaceful. The next morning, we visited the Orion Investments building. Sleek, modern, glass-walled. Inside, everything was sterile perfection. A woman at the reception desk greeted us politely. "Do you have an appointment?" "Yes," Daniel said confidently. "We're here to discuss the Belmont estate holdings under Project Orion." Her smile faded. She made a quick phone call, whispered something, then told us to wait. 10 minutes later, a tall man in a charcoal suit appeared. His expression was unreadable. "Mr. Cole, Mr. Belmont. Follow me, please." He led us down a corridor to a private office overlooking the lake. The walls were lined with books and a faint scent of leather hung in the air. The man closed the door behind us and sat across the desk. "My name is Reinhardt," he said. "I handle legacy accounts for clients who prefer discretion. You mentioned Project Orion. That's a restricted fund." "We have proof of ownership," Daniel said, sliding the documents across the desk. "Partnership agreements signed by Thomas Belmont and Richard Cole." Reinhardt glanced at them, his expression tightening. "Where did you get these?" "They were found in a private vault under the Belmont Hotel," I said evenly. "We're here to claim what belongs to our family." He exhaled slowly, studying us both. Then he turned to his computer and typed something. A few minutes passed in silence before he said, "It seems your father, Mr. Cole, established this trust 30 years ago. It has grown significantly over time." "How much?" I asked. He hesitated. "Approximately 112 million US dollars. The room fell silent. My hands tightened on the armrest. "You can release it?" Reinhardt shook his head. "Not immediately. The account requires dual authorization. Yours, Mr. Cole, and a secondary signatory appointed by the original trustee." "Who's the second signatory?" Daniel asked. Reinhardt's voice dropped. "A man named Victor Hale." The name meant nothing to me, but Daniel froze. "He was one of Richard's partners," he said. "He handled the offshore transfers." Reinhardt nodded. "Mr. Hale passed away last year, but his son now controls his legal estate." I felt a chill run through me. "So to access the funds, we need his approval." "Exactly." Outside, the Swiss wind howled against the glass. The weight of what he said settled between us like a storm. If Hale's family knew what we were after, we weren't just chasing money anymore. We were walking into a fight for control. That evening, Daniel and I sat by the lake, the lights of Geneva reflecting off the dark water. "We can't stop now," he said quietly. "Dad's name, that money, it's the last piece." "I know," I said, "but whoever still benefits from this won't let it go easily." He smiled faintly. "Then we don't ask for permission." The next day we found the address of Victor Hale's son, Adrian, a sleek villa on the outskirts of the city. We didn't plan much. We just went. When he opened the door, he looked younger than I expected. Early 40s, tall, sharp eyes. He recognized my name immediately. "Ethan Cole," he said. "I was wondering when you'd show up." He invited us in like he'd been expecting us. The air inside smelled of expensive cigars and leather. "My father always said your old man had secrets," he said, pouring himself a drink. "Looks like he wasn't wrong." "We need access to the Belmont Trust," Daniel said. "You're the secondary signatory," he smirked. "And what makes you think I'd help you?" "Because," I said, meeting his gaze, "this isn't about the Coles anymore. It's about correcting what your father helped destroy." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he looked at the window, swirling the drink in his hand. "You know," he murmured, "my father always regretted it." The deal, the silence. He said Richard kept one promise, that one day the right man would come asking. He turned back to me. "I'll sign." It took less than an hour. With Reinhardt's confirmation, the account was unsealed. I watched as the numbers flashed across the screen, 9 figures, untouched for decades. The Belmont legacy restored. But as the transfer papers printed, Reinhardt looked at me with something close to pity. "Your father once told me," he said softly, "that the truth would set you free, but freedom always comes with a cost. Be careful what you build with this, Mr. Cole." When we walked out into the cold Swiss morning, the city felt different. Lighter, as if the ghosts that had followed me all my life had finally begun to fade. Daniel clapped a hand on my shoulder. "We did it," he said. "It's over." But I wasn't sure it was, because as we turned down the street, a black car idled near the curb. The driver's window rolled down just enough for me to see a familiar wax-sealed envelope sitting on the dashboard, one marked with my father's initials. And in that moment, I knew the story wasn't finished. Not yet. The engine's hum from that black car still echoed in my head as Daniel and I stood frozen on the street. The moment I caught sight of that envelope with the red wax seal, the same one my father used for every hidden message, something in me twisted. It couldn't be possible. He was gone. I had buried him, seen the will, the ashes, everything. And yet, there it was, his mark, untouched by time. The car pulled away slowly, turning the corner and vanishing into the gray Swiss morning. I rushed forward, but it was gone before I reached the curb. All that remained was the faint smell of engine oil and paper smoke. Daniel looked at me. "You saw that too, right?" I nodded. "Someone's still playing his game." We tried to chase the car, but the narrow streets and early traffic swallowed it whole. For the rest of the morning, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was thick, both of us knowing what the other was thinking. Whoever had left that envelope wasn't finished with us yet. Later that afternoon, when we returned to the hotel, the envelope was waiting in our room, placed neatly on the bed. No one had seen who brought it. My name was written in the same heavy black ink, the wax crest glinting faintly under the light. My hands trembled as I broke the seal. Inside was a single card, a date, a time, and one short sentence. "Meet me where the truth was buried." Daniel leaned over my shoulder. "The vault," I nodded. "The Belmont." We booked the first flight home. The journey back felt heavier than when we had left. Every sound, the hum of the plane, the shuffle of passengers, felt distant, like my mind had retreated into some fog. I thought about everything we had uncovered, about the millions resting in accounts now under our control, about the people who had hidden the truth for decades. But more than that, I thought about the man who had raised me. I couldn't decide whether I hated him or pitied him. By the time we landed, the city had already slipped into night. The skyline glowed faintly, and the Belmont's tower lights flickered like a watchful eye. We drove straight there. The hotel was quiet, nearly empty. The air smelled faintly of rain, and the marble floors gleamed under the lobby lights. The receptionist barely glanced at us as we headed for the elevators. When we reached the basement, everything looked the same. Cold walls, long shadows, the faint hum of pipes. But something felt different. A light was on at the far end of the corridor, one that hadn't been lit before. I exchanged a glance with Daniel. He nodded silently, and we walked toward it. Inside the maintenance room, a small projector sat on an old table. A sheet was pinned to the wall like a makeshift screen. The machine whirred softly. As we stepped closer, the image flickered to life. My father's face appeared, older this time, the lines deeper, the eyes tired. "Ethan," his voice began, quiet and deliberate. "If you're watching this, it means you've gone further than I ever wanted you to." My breath caught. Daniel stepped closer, staring at the screen in disbelief. "I know what you found," my father continued. "The trust, the vault, the documents. I knew you'd piece it together eventually. But there's one thing you still don't understand. I didn't steal from Thomas. I took what was already gone." He paused, eyes lowering. "Thomas wasn't the man you think he was. He was brilliant, yes. Kind once. But when the money came, he changed. He took risks, borrowed from the wrong people. When he couldn't pay them back, they came for me, for my family. So I made a choice. I paid them off, but it cost everything we built. Thomas disappeared because he ran, not because I made him vanish. But I couldn't let you or the world know the truth. So I buried it, and I took the blame silently. Because even in his ruin, he was your father." The recording glitched slightly. Static filled the screen before the image returned. "I loved you, Ethan. More than you'll ever believe. When I took you in, I thought I could protect you from the storm he created. But the past doesn't die, it hides. You've unburied it now, and the people who wanted him gone once will come for what's left." The screen flickered again. His voice grew weaker. "If you want to survive, find the second vault. You already have the key." The recording ended with a burst of static. Then silence. Daniel and I stared at each other, the words sinking like stones in water. "He's lying," Daniel whispered. "He has to be," but part of me wasn't sure. The fear in my father's eyes had been real. Whatever danger he'd warned about wasn't over. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the same brass key. On its edge, I noticed something I hadn't before. Tiny engraved letters. Coordinates. We looked them up. A location appeared. An old estate outside the city, abandoned for years. My father's property records confirmed it had once belonged to his company. It was where the Belmonts' first blueprint had been drafted. Without another word, we drove. The estate sat on a hill surrounded by overgrown trees. The iron gate creaked open as we pushed it, the sound echoing into the night. The mansion beyond was a skeleton of what it once was. Windows shattered, ivy crawling across cracked stone walls. We moved through the grand entrance, flashlights slicing through dust and shadows. The air smelled of mold and time. In the center of the grand hall stood a massive marble statue, half broken, depicting two men shaking hands. One bore a resemblance to Thomas, the other Richard, the past frozen in betrayal. We searched room after room until we found the study. The desk drawers were empty, but behind a torn painting, Daniel found a hidden panel. Inside was a lock. The key fit perfectly. When I turned it, a section of the floor shifted, revealing a staircase leading down. The air grew colder as we descended. At the bottom was another vault, smaller but lined with metal cabinets and dusty shelves. Old records filled the space. In the center sat a single black briefcase on a pedestal. I opened it carefully. Inside was a stack of passports, old photographs, and one final letter addressed to me. "Ethan," it began. "If you found this, then you've discovered everything. The money, the truth, the lies between them. You've also found the men who once owned me. They wanted Thomas gone, and when he refused to sell, they forced my hand. I took you to protect you from them. The Belmont fortune, the Cole name, they were all part of the same shadow. But now it's yours to end." I looked at Daniel, my chest tight. He wasn't protecting the secret. He was protecting me. Behind us, the faint creak of a floorboard cut through the silence. We spun around. A silhouette stood at the top of the stairs, the flashlight beam catching his face. Adrian Hale. "I told you the truth has a cost," he said, stepping down slowly. "You think money this old doesn't come with ghosts? My father wasn't the only one who wanted it buried. What do you want?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "To finish what they started." Before I could respond, Daniel lunged forward. The two collided, the briefcase falling and scattering its contents across the floor. I grabbed it and ran for the stairs. Behind me, the sound of fists and shattering glass filled the air. I reached the top and turned back just as Daniel broke free, blood on his lip but fire in his eyes. He shouted, "Go! Get it out!" I hesitated, torn between running and fighting, but then I saw Adrian pull a small pistol from his coat. The gun went off, the sound deafening in the hollow estate. Daniel stumbled, clutching his shoulder. I rushed back down, grabbing him under the arm, pulling him toward the exit as Adrian reloaded. Another shot echoed, striking the wall beside us, sending splinters flying. We burst through the front doors into the cold night, the briefcase still clutched in my hand. By the time we reached the car, Adrian was gone. The house behind us stood silent once again, like it had swallowed its own sins. Daniel leaned back in the seat, breathing hard, the wound shallow but bleeding. "You okay?" I asked. He nodded weakly. "Just get us out of here." We drove until the city lights appeared again. I didn't speak until we reached the hospital. While the doctors patched him up, I sat outside in the sterile white hallway, the briefcase beside me. Inside, it lay everything. Proof of the money's origin, the corruption, the hidden network my father had fought in silence. It wasn't just about inheritance anymore. It was about ending what he never could. The next morning, I took the briefcase to Claire, the journalist. I handed it to her without a word. "You want the real story?" I said. "Here it is. All of it." She opened it, eyes wide. "Ethan, this will blow everything open. Then let it." 3 months later, the world knew everything. The Belmont legacy, the coal empire, the offshore network, the corruption that had built generations of wealth, it all came crashing down. But with the wreckage came clarity. Daniel recovered and moved into his father's restored house. The Belmont name was finally restored in full. As for me, I left the city. I bought a small cabin near the coast, quiet, away from headlines and fortune. Some nights I walk along the cliffs, listening to the waves crash below. I still think about the man who raised me and the man who gave me life. I've come to realize they weren't opposites. They were both broken men trying to protect what little they could. In their own way, they both loved me. A few days ago, a letter arrived at my door with no return address. Inside was a single key, identical to the brass one I had carried all this time. Tied to it was a note, written in that same deliberate handwriting I thought I'd never see again. "Legacy isn't what you inherit. Ethan, it's what you choose to leave behind." I looked out at the sea, the horizon stretching endlessly before me, and for the first time, I felt at peace. The truth had cost everything, but it had given me something greater, freedom. And as the wind carried the last echo of my father's voice through the crashing waves, I finally understood. The story was never about revenge. It was about release.